Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Programmer's Paradise and Embarcadero's webinar, Building and Tuning SQL Server Applications. Just a brief overview of our agenda. We're going to go into a slide of who we are at Programmer's Paradise. Then we're going into the webinar itself, Building and Tuning SQL Server Apps, given by Al Mannarino, the lead systems engineer and evangelist at Embarcadero, and Scott Walz, the senior director of project management, also at Embarcadero. Then we're going to go into some questions and answers. Questions and answers, please feel free to type them into the chat as the webinar proceeds, and they'll be answered at the end of the presentation. And then we're just going to do a quick summary. Quick note on who we are here at Programmer's Paradise. We're a leading e-seller of developer and infrastructure tools. We can be found on the web at www.programmers.com. We are an Embarcadero reseller. ALM, Brad Studio, JBuilder, etc. Database, we have DBArtisan, ER Studio, and etc. Team development services, we offer assessments, deployments, and migration. Here's a quick view of Programmer's Paradise ALM worldview and our software ecosystem. We are industry-leading tools for your end-to-end development needs to find, design, develop, test, deploy, and manage. And with that, we are going to hand it over to Al at Embarcadero to start our webinar. Al?
Wonderful. So hello, and thank you for joining both Scott and Al for this live webinar on building and tuning SQL Server Database-Driven Apps. So on this webinar, we're going to discuss what can an application developer learn from a database developer. And from this webinar, we are going to learn how to open up the SQL Server Database black box, how to debug SQL code and stored procedures, how to optimize SQL through the use of Visual SQL Tuning diagrams, and that's going to save us hours or maybe even days of troubleshooting and tuning. We're going to identify what-if scenarios and load test our code to see its impact on database performance. And we're going to use database deployment tools to extend our reach, our expertise, and value to our organization. And we're also going to see how using Embarcadero's DBPower Studio for SQL Server is going to help us write high-quality SQL code faster, tune our code against SQL Server, and keep our development and test servers in sync. So real quickly, just to introduce myself, so my name is Al Mannarino, and I'm an Embarcadero systems engineer. So I have over 25+ years of software development experience, including object-oriented analysis and design, and developing and deploying production applications. So that's enough about me. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Scott. So Scott's going to introduce himself. So Scott, let's let the folks know a little bit about yourself.
All right. Thank you, Al. And good handoff, and just a little background, we're going to be handing things back off between each other, so may have a little bit of delay, but nothing big, so the first handoff went well. My name is Scott Walz. I am the Senior Director of Product Management here at Embarcadero Technologies. I have been in the database industry, coming up, 20 years this year, so a lot of experience. Spent a lot of my pre-Embarcadero life working with Oracle. So I have a lot of experience with the relational database market. At Embarcadero, I am responsible for the products that we'll see today in DBPower Studio as a product manager, so I get the opportunity to go out and talk to customers, hear feedback, and gather requirements, and then work directly with our engineering group to turn those and request into product. And it's a very rewarding position that I'm in to be able to do that, to turn those ideas and bring them and put them into products so the end users can actually see what they had envisioned get onto their desktops. So on our agenda today, we want to talk about the 3 pillars of database development and talk a little bit about connecting the application development with the database. Certainly I want to take the time to show you DBPower Studio for SQL Server and what we can do within that tool set. And lastly, questions and answers. And as was mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please use the QA manager, and we will address those at the end. I'm already seeing a couple of good ones coming through, so please keep those going. So, Al?
Scott, if I can jump right in here. so, on my application IDE side, when I'm developing these applications, from my side, from the application developers, I hear, many times it's the database people's fault that the application is slow. So on your side, in your role, I know you get to see and speak to a lot of the, on the database side. So Scott, what do you hear from the database side?
Well, Al, as you can imagine, right, there is some finger pointing going back and forth, and that's, it is what it is, but a lot of times the DBAs and the database developers are focused. Their heads down. They know what they're responsible for. So they feel like they have a pretty good idea of the SQL being introduced to the database, right, either in a stored procedure or a trigger, a package, or a function. And they vet that out, and these guys have the years of knowledge. I'm not going to say years equal expertise, but for the most part they understand, and they're very familiar with the database. But oftentimes they'll tell me that, we're sort of stuck, Scott, because the application guys are using SQL within the application and submitting that against the database. Sometimes we have no idea what's being submitted. Best case scenario, we don't need to know. Everything works fine. And worst case scenario is we because we're responsible for the database, we're the ones that get the call that say my application's slow, and it's slow because, it's slow at this screen when I'm going out to query the, like for instance, query a client record. And, the DBAs will go through and look at all their code and realize, we haven't written any store procedures or anything to pull that code back. So now they're sort of scratching their heads and, where is that code being accessed? So again, a little bit of pushback, a little bit of finger pointing, but you know what, at the end of the day, the DBAs and developers, as well as the application developers, they're responsible for a lot of things. And the thing that works is the one thing when the end users say, give it a thumbs up, they really don't care who fixed the problem. They don't care how it got fixed. They just know that their application's screaming right now. And that keeps the DBAs from getting up in the middle of the night, the application developers from coming in, to a long list of things to do. So that's what we're working on here, is to try and streamline that process, make troubleshooting easy, and at the end of the day, produce high-quality apps.
Well, thanks, Scott. That's really all great information. Now, from me on my application developer IDE side, I still hear that, in some organizations, especially smaller development shops, the application developer also has the responsibility for developing the database interaction layer. So for me, as an IDE application developer, I need SQL tools that are going to add value to me to help me with the database interaction layer. So specifically, I need a tool that's going to help me write the SQL. Because I often ask myself, how do I do an inner join? How do I code the correct SQL? How do I code and debug stored procedures? How do I visually understand the SQL Server database and its tables? And then next, once I get some type of SQL code written, then I ask myself, do I have slow SQL and or a slow running database? I need help to fix my poorly running SQL and database. So what happens, and then I also need to know, what happens to my application and database under heavy load? And lastly, I could use a tool that's going to help me find SQL problems that I may have created myself. Like, for example, let's say I was able to access some data yesterday, but today I'm told I don't have access, and I don't know why. So I need to know what actually changed in my database. So Scott, what can I do as an application developer? What can you do to help me as an application developer, help me with my database development?
Al, I don't know where to begin. Maybe you need to find another line of work. Goodness sakes. No, but anyway, really, what we're doing here is, trying to arm you, trying to equip you with the tools, right? And again, you've got so much on your plate. Everybody does nowadays, right? The old adage, do more with less. If there's ever a time in my 20 years of doing this that it really is amplified, it's now. You just don't have the bandwidth to be able to sit and spend hours trying to debug something, spending hours trying to go through all the iterations of writing a query a different way. As you mentioned, working on the inner joins. How do I construct it? At some point, it's worth it to get a tool that eliminates the need to sit there and do the monotonous work over and over and over again. So And you hit on something now that I want to jump back to. You know, I talk with a lot of shops that are very segregated. There's a DBA group, right? And then there's a database development group. And then, and in a whole other building, maybe in another continent, is the application developer, right? And they don't work together, right? They maybe pass specs back and forth, but they don't work together. But you mentioned something that's very, very important, and that's the shop that does it all. And not only does it do it all within one building, it's all done within one cubicle, right? That same person who is busy typing, busy creating a Delphi application also has to worry about how the SQL Server is running, right? How to tune the SQL. Again, if there's ever a time, the time is now to use the tools, right? Leverage the tools. And I think you're going to see once we show it, once you get into some demos and actually then talk about the pricing at the end, I think you're going to get excited about what we have to offer. But let me just jump in. We talk about the 3 pillars of database development. Right, pillar 1 is obviously database development, performance tuning, and SQL optimization, and database change management. Right. So the goal here is to improve quality and performance at every stage of the application development lifecycle. Right, so we jump in here with database development. Right. Number 1, we recognize that you're going to spend majority of your time in the SQL IDEs. So we want to produce the rich SQL IDE, the experience so you can just hop in, start coding, give you the column lookup, the object lookups, the real-time syntax checking to prevent you from getting too far down the path only to find that you've had some typos. We're going to catch that in real time. The ability to do code templates so you can share off blocks of code, auto-replace, a lot of things like that within your IDE. Code assistance, again, those little utilities that make it easy, paste syntax, paste SQL syntax, the auto-replace things like that, all within the SQL IDE. Database object management, you're going to see within Rapid SQL, really easy to get inside and look at tables, look at objects, create new indexes. It's all wizard-driven. You don't have to worry about the syntax. We're taking care of that all for you behind the scenes. SQL debugging, again, we won't have time today to show it, but it's real-time. It's integrated. You're going to step through, assign breakpoints, hop in and out, step through, step over, just like you'd expect from a normal debugging environment. And lastly, and one of the things that has really been focused on lately, and at this customer sites that I visit and other speaking engagement, is the team collaboration, the ability to, within our SQL development product, to work as a team, right? To use our project facility to lock it into source code control. So as we work with a project, if Al were to need a block of SQL, he'd check it out. When I open up Rapid SQL, I'd see that file is checked out. I can't get it. It's read-only at that time. So it's seamless integration to my version control system. So again, I don't have to leave the product. It's all right there for me. So again, these are some of the screenshots. I talk myself right through this. I get so excited, so passionate about this stuff that
this is all great stuff.
Yep. So the second tenet, performance tuning and SQL optimization. And this time I'm going to press the next button here. So the first thing we want to do is generate cases, right? What if cases? What if 15 users are executing at once? How is it going to handle this, right? So here we have a load utility that we can run a block of SQL. We can specify the number of parallel sessions, the execution, end condition. Is it time or is it the number of executions? And then we have a sleep between execution, trying to do our best for real time to make it as real as possible when we run this load test. And there's our run button. Looking at then, once we're running it, how is it affecting the database? And when we get to the demo here in a little bit, I'll show you some of what I was able to do within the tool to find the bottlenecks, to find the potential problems. So here we're just looking at profiling of a database. It's profiling as the database is moving along through the day, and we're finding some spikes. And it's really easy with the tools within DB Power Studio for SQL Server to find it. We're not guessing anymore. The graphs show us exactly where the spike is, and then we go in to just that spike and work there. The optimization, the tuning, the index analysis, the stress simulation, as I talked about, the load. We talked about profiling. Again, the things that you're going to see: explain plans, execution statistics, what you would normally and what you'd always expect to see in a tuning product. And lastly, a database change management, right? What do we mean by that? We really mean a wide variety of things. Not only are we talking about schema changes, right, but we're also talking about configuration changes. When you start standing up multiple instances, sometimes, there are issues that come up, and there's issues that affect the database, and you can look for days, and I've been on customer sites that they've done it, they've looked for a long time, and they haven't been able to find anything, only to step back and look at the configuration and find that there was a configuration setting that had changed from one server to another, and that's what affected it. So we can do schema comparison, configuration comparison, as well as a level of data comparison. And then we can synchronize. And I'll show you a little bit of this in our demo later on, how I took the SQL Server, took a baseline archive, and then compared it to where it stands today, and we can map out those changes and what happens. So again, the lastly is, with two buttons, two bullets left, masking test data. We have that utility to go ahead and randomize test data from the live data there, so we can easily stand up test data by just randomizing and masking the production data. So if there's any sensitive data there, we can do that easy. And change notification, the jobs that I'm going to show later on all can be created using the user interface that we'll see, and then saved and run at a later date with email notifications. So when I come in the morning, my nightly jobs run, I'll simply get an email, and I'll be able to see the change index. And if the change index is 0, that means nothing's changed, everything's good. Change index may be 1. You look at it a little bit closer. Okay, that's the column I added. Everything's good. But then you get those days where you look, change index is 5, and you look and you think, hey, wait a minute, that's the CEO's username that was dropped. Uh-oh. And so it alerts us before we may potentially have problems. We know what it does, and the beauty of the tool is it creates the scripts for you that synchronizes them. You don't have to worry about running around trying to figure out what scripts to use. Okay, so here we go. Al, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Wow, Scott, that was great. So what I've just seen and heard is, DB Power Studio for SQL Server is not just about helping me write high-quality SQL faster, but it's also going to give me a much more capable environment. So it's going to really improve the quality and the performance at every stage of my application development lifecycle. So that's really great. So thanks again for that great explanation on DB Power Studio. So now that I have a better understanding of what a database developer does, I think I may now be able to extend my application development skills to include what's going on in the database. So let's say I'm this application developer, and I need to create this new global investment management application that tracks investments and their detailed functional transactions. And this system is going to use a new SQL Server database on a remote server. Now, I know nothing about this SQL Server database or its tables or its columns. So for me as the application developer, I'm going to choose my favorite IDE to code the application. So using that IDE, I can quickly create a GUI application that can connect to that SQL Server database and bring me back some default data like we see on the screen here. But at this point, I still don't know any of the details for this database or its tables or its columns or its relationships or anything about the database. So and then also, with these current IDEs today, many of them have a SQL window feature where I can get some additional information about the SQL Server database. So I can get its table names, and I can see how the tables are joined to each other by their column names. These IDEs will also create for me some SQL based on whatever tables I include in my SQL window, and it's going to return some results from that SQL. But as far as these IDEs are concerned, that's pretty much what I can do on the database layer, using the IDE's database features. So at this point, we really want to take a step back now, and let's take some real life examples, and let's see how DB Power Studio for SQL Server, can help me as an application developer to create the database layer. So at this point, I'm going to share my desktop. So at this point, you should be able to see my desktop, and I'm sitting inside my my IDE. So this is my IDE of choice because once again, I need to create this new global investment management system that connects to a SQL database and brings back some information. So I'm in my tool. So once again, in my IDE, using its point and click, I can drag and drop some components from the palette onto a form. I can connect to my MS SQL global information management database. I can drop some a sample query onto my form, and then I can run this application. So it goes out to my SQL Server database, brings back some data. So I can quickly connect to that SQL Server database and quickly create this GUI application, and it's going to bring me back this default data. But I still don't have any details for this database or its tables or its columns or its relationships. So the next thing I can do inside of these IDEs, I can open up a SQL window, and from the SQL window, it's going to show me my individual tables. So what I really want to do for this global investment management application, one of the requirements is to create a report with a list of the clients and their brokers and the values of their portfolios. So with these IDEs, I could use this SQL window to help me do that. So I know, for example, I'm going to need information from the client table. I know I'm going to need information from the broker table. And I know I'm going to need information from their portfolio table. And just by guessing here, I can guess that from the client table, I can probably join the client and the broker table by this broker ID field. And just by guessing by their names, I could probably guess that the client and the portfolio table are joined by this client ID field. So that I can do. And then as I do this, these SQL windows are generating the default SQL for me. So let's say the query I want to do is from the client table, I want my client's first name and their last name. From the broker table, I want their last name and their first name. And from the portfolio table, I want their value. So it generates this default SQL for me. I can now run this SQL. I can execute this SQL, and it's going to return this report back to me. So the SQL returns results, but I still don't know if this is the best, most tuned SQL, and I don't know the response or the load on the SQL Server database. Let's say if hundreds or maybe thousands of people all want to run this same SQL at the same time. So to really help me, Scott, I could really use a tool like DB Power Studio to help me tune and profile this SQL to quickly discover and diagnose and optimize any poor performing SQL I have. So at this point, Scott, I think it's good if I pass the ball back over to you, and then maybe you can show me, starting with this SQL I have here, how we can use DB Power Studio for SQL Server to help me tune this SQL.
Sure thing, Al. All right, let's get that set back. All righty, now let me get over here and share my desktop. Okay, Al, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to make sure this is working.
Right now, Scott, I see a blank screen.
All right, are we good yet?
Yes.
All right, great. So the first thing I want to do is bring up DB Power Studio. So with that query that you were using, I went ahead and created a load job for this. So I went ahead and ran it, parallel sessions 25 and some execution time. I ran it for 12 minutes just to see with a delay of 250 milliseconds. And I sent that running. And I did that this morning, ran it a few times. And then while the entire time I was profiling my database, so as you can see here, I have a file, and I'm looking, we refer to that as an OAR file. And the beauty with working with DBPower Studio, in those shops that person might be doing everything, but yet may have availability to a DBA, we can record these sessions and save them, and they're able to be shopped around, right? You can send them to a DBA that say, hey, can you look at this and tell me if there's anything that jumps out to you? Well, immediately, and again, I apologize for the graphics. Well, the meeting here, the online meeting is messing with it a little bit, but you'll get the point. You'll be able to see the spikes. And when we see a spike, we can just hover over it and drill right in. And then we start seeing some of the queries. And so here's one that we looked. We saw the database activity, and we start scrolling down, and sure enough, Al, it's that query. We can also look to see what other queries have been running. And again, I'm running some other utilities on my database that are picking up, putting some load. We can track this down by events, looking at top events that are happening. Again, this is pretty much all CPU at this time. What sessions are happening? I had one with our performance analyst tool, and then any procedures that were being executed against the database. So here's the SQL text. Highlight that. So at any time, we can scroll through here. If we'd like to look at another spike, simply hover over, select it, and we see another spike shows up. So we can take this then, that query, and we can right-click if we'd like, and we can tune it. So that takes it over, and we'll look at the GIM database. And we can look, and there's our tuning. So here at this time, we can go to an overview session. We can look here. We want to perform a detailed analysis, execute this 2 times, and go ahead and press run. It's going to generate the cases that we'd like to see. And I always like to run it at least 2 times, maybe more, but for the sake of this demo, I don't want to do too much. I'm running everything on a VM on my laptop, so I don't want to tax it too much. But what it's doing right now is it's going out and going through a lot of permutations, right? A lot of rewrite stuff that in the old days we would be forced to write ourselves. And the SQL Server includes quite a few ways to coach and and convince a query how to optimize itself. You know, when you're talking like a platform like Oracle with well over 100 hints that could be applied, it gets really, really sticky. So while this is going off and running, it should be finished shortly. I just want to show you where I came through and looked at this earlier. Al, well, hold on, we're finished. So let's go ahead and look at the execution statistics. So here the elapsed time was 0.24. Right now, that's not that big of a deal, right? It's sub-second. We're running really fast, really good. So you, in theory, do I really have to touch it? Maybe not. But if that query is being run thousands of times a day, any performance improvements you can make on that is going to be helpful. And here we quickly show you graphically which ones are better with the green, right? Which ones are worse with the red if they're within a certain threshold. So here we can look at the row lock. And we click here to see the text, and we can look here that there's a hint that we can apply to this table, to the view client portfolio, and put the with row lock on. So again, it speeds it up. If we want to look at what other selections we can see, here's one with the table index. So again, we can coach it to tell it what index to use. So again, things that, you know, even with my years of experience, I'm not going to know to do this. It would take me a while, a lot more than just hitting a couple clicks of the mouse button to get through. So here I can take this then and give it back to you, Al, and tell you, here's a script to use instead. And if you're the same person doing both, now you've got the utility, the tool to generate that SQL for you. What I also saw, Al, during working with that was a stored procedure that I saw there that had a bunch of queries in it. So when I looked at that, that's part of that investment management thing, the investment management database in the application, and this one was doing a breakdown of all the brokers, looking at how they stacked up. And there were multiple queries in that, and that's what we get to. We get in situations where there are stored procedures that we deem are slow, and the entire stored procedure takes the rap, when in essence it could be a single query, right? So I ran this through, and I found one that 0.11 seconds, and basically I could get it down to practically nothing with a row lock hint. So I went ahead and did that over in my IDE, and I'll show you that in a minute. Again, we're looking at things, the OIR file before I leave DB Power Studio, which I'm in right now. We're looking at there the profiling. We can go in there and actually look and tune the queries if we like, step through, perform the detailed analysis. The one other factor I want to show you here is the Analysis tab. And so here we're looking at our Visual SQL Tuning diagram, which DB Optimizer, as part of DB Power Studio for SQL Server, is the only tool on the market that has this capability. So let's do a detailed analysis and show the ratio and the counts. So here, again, this is a very simple query. So, I don't want to make something out that it's not. It's very simple. But when you're dealing with large queries, you can really see where this could come into play. So here we select the broker table, and we're always trying to work with the smallest running row count as possible. So here we're looking at the broker table. We're going to bring 23 records back and then slowly step ourselves up. So we want to start with the smallest row count and go from there as we do our joins. So there we get up to the client. We see where that's joined and where it's referenced in the query. And then lastly is the view. And sometimes, though, with the best intentions, the DBAs create views. There are occurrences where those views are what are slow. So the constructs of the view are actually, they aren't optimal. So here we can work our way up through there, see the exact the makeup of the view, look at the subqueries. We just hover over it. We can see the actual query that's being run to create the subqueries, look at the row counts that make up the view. So we get a better understanding of how our query is being processed and how we can help it, and we can coach it to be an optimal query. Down below, we look at our indexes. We can hover over anything. Indexes used by the Database Optimizer. So there are some indexes that we show are being used, and there's others that show are being suggestions. So here's one that the client transaction is scanned via a full table scan, but it is a filter where the action equals cell. So we could suggest implementing this index. So there's ways that DB Optimizer can help you not only get and optimize the query itself, but actually put some things on the database that can help as well. So we've done our optimization. We found this, right? So then what do we do next? So we really want to step over and look within Rapid SQL. So here I'm looking. I just dropped a bunch of SQL in, and the way we do this, I can start writing from scratch. Right. At any point, though, I can simply right-click on an object and extract, and it's going to put it right into an iSQL window. So we can start working here. Let me close this out and get back to this window. Let me go ahead and slide this over. Right, so we can start working here. We've got our database that we're working with. It's the Global Investment Management. We can slide. Let's see, where do we want to go here? Okay, so then, as I talked about the column lookup, I'm continuing the type, and I'm going to be able to have it start working with the columns that I need. And as I type there is not, I'll do the typo. Again, as I talked about real-time syntax checking, I can hover over this. I can see the unexpected null. It's going to correct me immediately, so I don't have to wait to see until I actually try and run this stored procedure that I have some issues. I mentioned earlier about the object management, and let me just go to a table. And you'll see that I'm connected to SQL Server 2008 R2 real quick. I also have SQL Server 2000 databases, 2005 as well as 2000, all from within the same UI. I don't have to worry about having Enterprise Manager to connect to my old platforms, my old databases, and then Management Studio. And do I have to worry about if I have the R2 version of Management Studio? I'm able to do this all from within the tool. So let's go ahead and look at the tables. Here we'll right-click on the table and we'll open. And here is the table editor. I talked about doing certain things within the tool. For instance, if we'd like to add a column, and maybe it's email address. All right, let's make it. And again, the tool is taking care of this for us, right? We don't have to worry about what column types are available for certain additions, so we'll make that, better make it 50. Step through, and then here is our new column. right, email address. But, you know, I don't want my column there. I'd like it up in the middle, maybe after the middle initial, right? If you've ever tried to do this, you know, there's certain platforms that allow it very easy. There's others that are very challenging. And a lot of products just insert it and just throw it right at the end. Rapid SQL as well as DBArtisan both will do what we refer to as an extended alter, which will be basically deconstruct the tables and all the dependencies, offload the data, create the new table, and bring the data back, and then bring back all the dependencies that are needed based on that table. So all that work for you, probably a few hundred lines of pure SQL statements are written to support this function. So as other products just drop it at the end, if you really want it in the middle, we can do it for you. We'll close out. Al, on that procedure that I mentioned that I showed, I went ahead and I put a row lock there. So when this store procedure runs, I think we're going to start seeing the improvements that hint from that DB Optimizer presented us is going to kick in, and we're going to see this query and run a lot quicker. And that's just one SQL statement of all of the stored procedures. So I'll run this through. I'll probably do the load testing again, run it a few times, set up that the profiler, capture that, and go back in, and maybe I'll find another query that needs to be tuned. But again, I'll go through it systematically and work through each query until I get that store procedure just screaming. So now those end users will be off my back. I'll have it ready to go so I can turn my attention to something else. So that's Rapid SQL, right? I do want to touch on, because we'll talk about this later on with our different editions. Our DB Power Studio for SQL Server DBA edition comes with not only DB Optimizer, DB Change Manager, and Rapid SQL, our development IDE, but it also comes with DBArtisan, our flagship database administration product. So again, you're going to see a lot of the same look and feel that we saw in Rapid SQL, but you're going to get some other added benefits. You're going to get some performance analyst, for instance, and space analyst, both real-time metrics that go in against your database and let you see real-time how your database is performing. Here we can see some of our ratios, right, and how they're working. We see some dips at times where things were happening. We can set alarms. So, for instance, number of errors in the current log is 5. I've got it set to anything over 1, let me know about. And if we want to see all the alarms affecting this database, we just select the alarms button, and we can set this up. It comes prepackaged with the standard, with a default set of alarms. You can certainly go in there and modify those. So that's DBArtisan, a ton of features within that. Let me step out here and close before we go back and show you DB Change Manager. So Al, before we got started today and prepping for this webinar, I went ahead and took a baseline archive of my global investment management database. So we started looking, and I just put that off to the side, right? That's my baseline, because I wanted to track my changes. I wanted to see how I stood up after I did some things today and made some changes and what it looked like. So here's my comparison job. I'm going against an archive, and I can pick any version of the archive I'd like. I selected the latest version, which is version 1. I'm going against a live data source. I went over to my refinements. I'm only going to use the GIM owner, and we can get here and really dial this in as far as what types we'd like. We look at the object refinement, and I'm going to bring everything over as far as all the tables and the stored procedures that we're working with. We go to the mapping, and if we have different users, maybe it's a QA system, so it's GIM_QA, whatever it be, we can set that mapping up. It's really customizable. We go to our options, synchronization method. We're going to do manual. I'm one of those guys that show me what you want to do, and then I'll tell you if I want to do it or not. Or include object options. We can certainly force the extended alter if needed, exist in source only. We're going to create it. We can ignore things for the comparison. We can ignore text case. You know, some databases like lower, some DBAs like uppercase. It just depends on the flavor, but you know what? For a comparison, I don't really care. So we step through, look at the notification. We can bring in some email notifiers if we'd like. Look at the history of the job. I did a run later on this morning. We've got to look at the comparison results, and here I see a 95% match. So I'm feeling pretty good right now because I did put that change into the stored procedure. So I'm thinking, you know what, that potentially is my change. But what I found out is that when I went in a little bit further is that I had 2 creates, which was sort of caught me off guard. I had 1 alter, which I expected. So if I want to narrow this down, on the left, I'll look at the creates and the alters. So the alter is indeed the store procedure that I created, and you'll see that as we look through here, that is how I'm going to, the script that would be used to bring the live data source back in line with the archive. So, but that's fine. I'm going to accept that change because I want it with that latest hint. But what got me here are these 2 creates, which I found out through using Change Manager that I had 2 indexes removed. Right, I was missing 2 indexes, 2 key indexes that are probably, Al, would have affected your query. An index on the client transaction on the broker ID, as well as the client transaction on the client ID. So there's a couple of indexes that were dropped for some reason. I don't know why, but needed to be there. So I can look at the script now. I can generate a sync script if I like. And this sync script then will go through and give me all of the script that I need to generate this. So here's the alter procedure. In this case, I'm probably going to comment this out, but I am interested in running the create index statements for both the client transaction broker index and the client transaction client index. So again, I use the tool. I just, a couple of clicks, drop downs, some selection boxes here and there, and let the tool do the job. I can compare, again, I used an archive of my database, compared it to live. I can compare 2 live-to-live databases. What I like to do sometimes when I'm standing up new machines in my office is compare a live data source to another live data source that I know is empty, and what it will do is it will generate all the script I need to stand up a brand new instance of my database. So, the tools, the automation approach is how we're going to save you a lot of time and make sure we can maximize your efficiency as well as allowing you to produce the most efficient code possible. So let me go ahead and step back out of here, and I have the...
That was really great, Scott. So thanks for that great presentation on what I could do with DB Power Studio for SQL Server. So now I have a real good idea and a real good understanding of its features and capabilities. So knowing what I can do with DB Power Studio for SQL Server, I know I can now extend my application developer skills to include what's actually happening inside of that SQL Server database. So now I can create both applications that scream and database queries that scream, because in my business it's all about performance. When my individual clients click that button for I want my give me my net worth, they want to see that report back instantaneously. And as you know, it's all about performance. So thank you again for that great presentation.
No problem, Al. Now let's cut to the chase here, and I'm sure we want to get down to brass tacks here and look at some pricing. So let me just give you a little overview of where we were and what we're thinking here. We have a rich history of database products, both administration, development, and change management, optimization. So when you look at that and you bundle all those products that we used to have, well, we still do, right, as a standalone. If you purchase them standalone, $13,000. Now, that is just...
Look at that, Scott, because remember, I deal with a lot of smaller development shops, and that's a very difficult number for us to even consider. So I'm hoping you can help us out.
Oh, well, Al, I'll make it easier for you. Nobody, once they looked at that number, they were out of the conversation, right? Our best-of-breed tools then, we were gone. But we needed to be playing. We needed to be a player. So bringing in DB Power Studio for SQL Server, the DBA edition. This is the edition that includes the administration tool as well as the development IDE, the optimization, and the change management, right? $19.95 per copy, right? Over $11,000 in saving. That price includes first-year support and maintenance. So we recognize the need, we recognize the value, and we needed to get it in there. Right, so that's the DBA edition. Now, Al, I know, you and I have spoken about this at length, about that edition for just the developers, right? The folks that need to tune, need to write queries, potentially do some database object creation need to debug, change management. Here, you package Rapid SQL Professional with Optimizer and DB Change Manager, $5,000. A little bit better, but still, you know, outside of some people's ballpark. And we're coming in now at $9.95 per copy, right? Over $4,100 in savings. Again, that $9.95 copy includes first-year support and maintenance. So for under $1,000, you're getting an unbelievable set of tools.
So that, to me, in my application developer world, yes, that's acceptable. That's something we can work with. And
now that's what we're hearing now, and we're getting some great uptick on this. A lot of the customers that we were talking to that love the tools, but the price point just wasn't right, are now coming back to us, and it's really exciting to watch them get the tools in and see the progress that they're making. But in summary, because I know we're running up on some time, and we certainly want to get time for Q&A. You know, as we talk about DB Power Studio for SQL Server, the key thing is boost performance across all versions of SQL Server. As I mentioned, we're working with 2000, 2005, 2008, and 2008 R2. The smooth migrations, right? We can help you move. As I mentioned about standing up those databases using Change Manager, I can do that, but I can move that database from 2005 over to 2008 R2 if I want to. It's that easy to do. Improve the quality at every single stage of the development cycle. As Al was mentioning, even doing the drag and drops, writing the queries within the IDE, we still want to make sure that those queries are running and performing as best they can. Just as important as those found within stored procedures and packages and functions on other platforms. And standardize on a single powerful solution, one vendor for everything you need. With DB Power Studio, save time and money. Again, I talked about the change management process. I'm just pointing and clicking, and it's doing all the work for me behind the scenes. The optimization side is a completely different ballgame with regard to what it's doing behind the scenes without me even getting involved at all. And open up communications. Again, to be able to communicate, and in some regards with the same terminology, right? To be able to provide a DBA with a suggestion on how to optimize a query, or showing them with a tool that, hey, my tool has found that there's an index missing that maybe we could benefit from having into the database. So you provide that communication level now between application development and database development.
You know, outstanding.
So at this point, I think, Al, we're ready for some questions. I know we had a few that came up, and I also want to mention that if we don't get to any, we'll certainly follow up online and email you the answers for sure.
Great. Thanks, Al and Scott. Our first question says, I'm running a MySQL app with a clustered database option. My queries are very slow response. I'm told this is due to a too small of a buffer. How do I change it, and where is the INI located?
All right, Al, I'll take this one. Great question. I will openly admit that MySQL is not my strong database, but I will do some research. I actually have a very good friend that works at in Oracle within the MySQL division, so if I can't find it, I'll certainly reach out to him, and we will get you an email back with that answer.
Okay. Next question. Given the complexities of DB Dev, don't products like FileMaker Pro make it simpler for easy customer-based DB creation over something this big? They have a customer that wants to use this. In other words, what is the main selling point of PS over FM?
All right, Al, I'll take it again. The main selling points, right? I'm going to go right off the top and say that we're going to provide a lot deeper support, deeper dive. This is our business, right? You know, I take pride in that we've been doing this in this space since '92 and developing a lot of tools. We have a lot of resources dedicated to doing nothing but working around the database and making sure our tools are up to speed and providing you know, optimal tools to work with the database, be them the optimization or the SQL IDE. And yes, you are correct. FileMaker and those other ones do make it really easy to do that, but you know, sometimes that can get you in trouble. The ease with which you can write a query is great, but without the knowledge that you're writing a very well-constructed query, a well-performing query, and understanding what's going on behind the scenes is oftentimes more important than the ease of writing the query. So, yeah, there's certainly some pluses and minuses, but I'm going to say that our depth is where we're going to stand out.
Great, and if anybody else has any questions, feel free to keep entering them. The last one for now is, does DB Power Studio work for SQLite or PostgreSQL?
That was, yeah, SQLite or Postgres, and the answer is no. Right now we're working, obviously we talked about DB Power Studio for SQL Server. There is also an addition available for single products for Oracle, Sybase ASE, and IBM DB2 LUW. And there's also a DB Power Studio XE edition, so if you're supporting multiple database applications, multiple platforms, then we have an XE offering, which includes all 4 platforms for one single price.
Okay, and is there any major differences in capabilities for versions for DB2 and Oracle?
Great question, and the answer is no. We're pretty, we pride ourselves on having a very similar look and feel. What we do with one platform, we strive to do with the next. Certainly, you're going to see some things that other vendors give us access to, maybe more readily. For instance, on a database monitor standpoint, we can get a lot more metrics from Oracle's metadata than we can from DB2's, but whatever we can get, we're going to show you. So, though there are some differences, we like to standardize and provide you with the best of all the platforms.
Will this work with the Express versions of SQL Server?
Yes.
Okay. And that's it for right now. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to put them in and we can have somebody follow up with you tomorrow.
Okay, and with that, we want to thank everybody for attending the webinar. For more information, please feel free to contact us at info@programmers.com, or you can visit us on the web at www.programmers.com/Embarcadero, or if you're in Canada, at our Canada website, www.programmers.ca/Embarcadero. Thank you, Al, and thank you, Scott, and thank you everyone again for attending. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.